After binging the entire last arc, Satoko, in an afternoon, I finally got around to finishing Higurashi Go earlier this week. Now that I've been able to think about it for a few days, I can confidently say that Satoko is my favorite character in Higurashi. Here I'll try to cover my reasons why I think her character is so compelling and why the recent twist only made me love her more. Part 1. Satoko in the visual novels. When I first started reading Higurashi, I wasn't a huge fan of Satoko. I didn't hate her or anything, but she was definitely my least favorite of the main cast. Her whole mischievous yet also a crybaby image wasn't really that interesting to me. Of course, when I got to chapter 3, which is Higurashi, my opinion changed drastically. I began to see that she had much more depth, and I came to care about her in much the same way Keiichi does in that chapter. Like virtually everyone experiencing that arc, I was on the must-protect Satoko train all the way. My opinion of her didn't really change much throughout the rest of the visual novels. I really appreciated her relationship with Satoshi and how she was able to overcome her weakness in Chapter 7 in Higurashi. She's a great character for sure, but I wouldn't say she was my favorite. Part 2. Satoko in Higurashi Go. When I first started watching Higurashi Go, I was aware of many people's suspicions that she was secretly behind everything in the new series. And this made me somewhat wary. As I mentioned earlier, I felt like Keiichi, that Satoko was a little sister who must be protected. If they were going to turn her into an evil mastermind, all those feelings I had about her character would be invalidated, right? So I kept watching, hoping she would turn out to still be the innocent girl I knew. Of course, my hopes were in vain in episode 17, when my worst fears were confirmed. When she pulled out a gun and gave that evil-looking smile, my heart sunk. How could they do this to such a great character? But things are never that straightforward in Higurashi, and over the course of the next 7 episodes, I came to realize that her transformation was not only believable and interesting, but made me like her a lot more. In fact, I would argue that this change was the natural next step in Satoko's character arc. Part 3. Betrayal. I think there are 2 main components in Satoko's transformation. The first is her perceived betrayal by Rika. With Satoko's tough exterior, it's easy to forget just how vulnerable she is underneath it all. She's been a victim of trauma for nearly all her life, from her mother's constant remarriages to abuse from some of those men, and even the guilt of killing them in a delusional lapse of consciousness. That's not even to mention her aunt and uncle's abuse, or the way she is ostracized by pretty much every adult in Inamizawa. The person she relied on through all of this, Satoshi, disappears without explanation, and she is left all alone. After all this, it's a wonder she's even able to function normally, let alone goof off with the other club members. But it is in these club members that Satoko discovers she's not alone, with Rika in particular becoming a sort of big sister figure for her. They are best friends, and when all the other club members have graduated, Rika is Satoko's one lifeline to normalcy. She has no one else. You could make the argument that she should go out of her way to make new friends, but remember that Satoko's trauma makes it extremely difficult for her to open herself up to people. So when Rika decides to go to St. Lucia, of course Satoko will go with her. But when Rika starts to drift away, becoming surrounded by new friends that overshadow Satoko, naturally she's upset. Rika promised they'd be best friends forever, but now she's basically ignoring her in favor of these new, pretentious girls who don't really even know her. As someone who's been in a similar situation, I can say this is one of the worst feelings in the world. I can only imagine what it's like for Satoko, who feels she has only one real friend remaining, to have this person consciously abandon her for someone else. It's heartbreaking. Now I know what some people are saying. Rika didn't abandon Satoko, she just made new friends. Why does Satoko think she's entitled to being Rika's only friend? This is valid, but it comes down to a lack of communication on both sides. Rika isn't ignoring Satoko out of malicious intent, but rather an assumption that Satoko will ask for help if she needs it. Meanwhile, Satoko is unwilling to actually ask Rika to come back to her as a friend. Remember how long she endured her uncle's abuse without telling anyone, all because she was trying to prove a point. Satoko is nothing if not stubborn, and asking for help is almost impossible for her. Look at how much effort it took in Minagoroshi. I have seen people cite Rika's statement that she did try to help Satoko, to which Satoko refused, as an argument that Satoko's feelings are unjustified. But here it comes down to the difference in their definitions of help. For Rika, she thinks help is assisting Satoko in her studies. But for Satoko, help is much more than that. It's a reciprocal relationship in which both of them support each other emotionally, being there for each other when times are hard. What Rika is offering is to be her glorified tutor. Again, this comes down to a lack of communication, which, as we discussed earlier, is not Satoko's strong suit. Of course, undergoing Rika's betrayal, at least as Satoko sees it, is not enough to make her into a villain. It's more like her mind is in the perfect state to be pushed over the edge. All of this lays the foundation for Satoko's transformation, and it is at this moment that the other major factor comes into play. Part 4. Becoming a looper. One thing Higurashi has taught me is that if you get stuck in a time loop, it takes a serious toll on your mental state. Many stories have explored this idea that with infinite time, anyone will become a villain. In this sense, becoming a villain is not surprising for someone who is looping. Now, you may argue that Rika doesn't become a villain, even though she's a looper, but I think the key here is that different people process this in different ways. Looping endlessly takes a toll on both Satoko and Rika. While Satoko expresses her destructive nature toward others, Rika becomes destructive toward herself. As we could see in Higurashi, she had reached a point of extreme nihilism before Keiichi started to change her view. This difference makes sense when looking at Rika's and Satoko's characters. Even stripping away the part of her that developed due to her looping, I believe Rika is quite mellow and content to be a bystander. This is probably partially due to her being treated so well by the village, and subsequently even at St. Lucia's. Satoko, meanwhile, is much more proactive and willing to do what she feels she must. She has had a much more difficult life, by Rika's own admission, and so has been forced to take action, particularly after Satoshi's disappearance, when she believes obstinately enduring her uncle's abuse is necessary for her to become stronger. We can even see this through her being arguably the most underhanded of the club members when they play games, willing to sabotage curry or set intricate traps to completely disable her opponents. The two characters are foils to each other, neither better or worse than the other. Perhaps that's why they make such good friends. But given the power of a looper, we can see these tendencies play out drastically differently. The effects of Rika's looping are explored in the visual novels, so I won't expound on them here. But I think the amount of time we spend with Rika compared to Satoko, a whole visual novel versus only a handful of episodes, can lead us to believe Satoko has hardly done any looping past a few attempts at changing Rika's mind. But I think Satoko did in fact loop many times to try to change Rika's mind, and we were only shown a few of these loops in the anime. Perhaps she didn't loop as many times as Rika did, but certainly enough to significantly warp her sense of right and wrong. At the point when she decides to break Rika through reliving her 100 years of looping, Satoko has likely already nearly forgotten the reason why she's doing it. She must beat Rika, and that's all there is to it. In this sense, it almost becomes like a club activity, with Satoko willing to do anything to beat her, even injecting innocent people with H-173. She has convinced herself that these worlds are erased every time she loops, and believes full well that what she's doing is morally sound. I'd like to add that Satoko using the time loops to win the club game is a great detail that shows that she's still the same person underneath all these changes. Of course Satoko would use her time looping powers to win games in the club. Furthermore, even though she is technically over 100 years old after countless looping and witnessing all of Rika's fragments, Satoko is still a child at heart. The same can be said of Rika. Though she often acts mature, her actions after June 1983 show that she still has the curious, fun-loving mind of a child. Part 5. Satoko is not simply a crazy yandere or a spoiled brat. Two of the characterizations I've seen people giving this new version of Satoko is yandere and brat. While these may be true to some degree, I don't think they do her character nearly enough justice. It's important to remember why she's doing what she's doing. First, to address the yandere one. Yanderes are typically characterized by being obsessed with someone, usually a love interest, and are willing to do anything, even incredibly violent things, to be with them. On the surface, this seems to match Satoko perfectly, but I think if we look a little deeper, that's not quite what's happening. I don't believe Satoko is obsessed with Rika, so much as she is terrified of being alone, of being abandoned. As I covered earlier, Satoko feels that she's been abandoned throughout her entire life. Her mother, Satoshi, the village, the club members going to college. Not all of these are abandoning per se, but to an emotional person like Satoko, it's easy to interpret it that way. To her, Rika is the only person she has left. When she tells Rika not to abandon Hinamizawa, what she's really saying is, don't abandon me. This scares her more than anything, so she is willing to do anything to keep Rika by her side. Second, Satoko being a brat. At St. Lucia's, it's easy to see Satoko as simply not wanting to do the great amount of homework and other academic duties. That's what she says, after all. And this certainly seems like the mindset of a spoiled brat. But again, it's important to look under the surface. St. Lucia's Academy is an incredibly toxic environment. We can see this when Satoko goes to study after school, and every girl in the classroom has this dead look in their eyes. One girl speaking about the special class as a kind of hell on earth. Not to mention, they throw students in a literal prison upon suspicion of wrongdoing. And even ignoring the administration, the students themselves are quick to mark anyone not lining up with their ideal version of a woman as a piece of garbage. For someone like Rika, it's easy for her to get swept up in the new lifestyle, especially when she is automatically looked up to merely due to her appearance. Satoko, on the other hand, isn't this type of person. She wishes to stay true to her laid-back, somewhat mischievous, yet also honest and caring self. But this doesn't fit in with St. Lucia's idea of womanhood, so she is ostracized by her fellow students and punished by the staff. Her very identity is being rejected. So, in some sense, you may be able to classify Satoko as a yandere or a brat, but these labels completely strip all nuance from her character. In truth, Satoko's motives are not extreme concepts that we like to look down on, such as crazed obsession or self-centered laziness. They are things that many people struggle with every day. Loneliness, the fear of being abandoned, and being rejected by society simply for being you. It is becoming a looper that then takes these feelings and amplifies them to the villainous level we see. I think if anyone in that kind of state were given the power Satoko was, they would eventually, after countless loops, turn toward the drastic solutions we see her using. Part 6. Concluding Thoughts. With all of this context, does this make what Satoko is doing right? Absolutely not. What she's doing is horrible, and so far removed from what anyone would think of as right. And yet she sees it as perfectly fine. It is this gradual shift in morality, while staying true to her original character, that makes Satoko so compelling. I loved Satoko the cinnamon roll from the visual novels, but I absolutely adore Satoko the tragic anti-hero we see here. That being said, I truly hope Satoko has some kind of redemption. As I mentioned, the original Satoko is still there deep down, and I think Rika and the others may be able to reach it eventually, tearing back the cage of madness she's built for herself. If Takano and even Teppei can have a chance at redemption in this anime, I believe Satoko will definitely get some kind of redemption. She may fall much further before this happens, but eventually I think she'll turn. Not sure how many seasons that might take, though. One of the central themes of Higurashi has always been forgiveness and change through the help of your friends. I think this is the perfect opportunity to show an entire new facet of this theme never explored in the visual novels. Of course, I could be totally wrong, and Ryokishi might have something entirely different planned for Satoko's character. But wherever this goes, I will watch with excitement. And as things stand now, this is why Satoko is my favorite character in Higurashi.